Insulin, basically on my mission, endless silence with stigma and shame about suicide loss, ideation, and mental health. Please, won't you join me? Welcome to Suicide Zen Forgiveness, the podcast that shares powerful stories of suicide loss, ideation, and mental health in order to break the silence, stigma, and shame. Our mission is to encourage empathy for those experiencing these challenges. Every narrative serves as a beacon of hope, want to touch lives and inspire resilience. Won't you join me in this journey as we share stories to help others to find hope? Please note, this podcast is for educational purposes and may contain triggering content. If you're grieving or experiencing mental health issues, please reach out to your local suicide hotline or mental health office for immediate help. And now, let's start the show. It's really good to be back. I'm Elaine Lindsay with Suicide Zen Forgiveness. We have a guest this week that goes by an interesting title, Ice Cold Leader. I'm going to let him tell you all about that and say, I used to be someone who did a lot of ice baths. Sadly, that was as a child, and it was because of health issues. I don't have the guts anymore to do that, and I don't think my poor old heart would take it. That's not what we're here to talk about, but as I'm always a little bent when I start, I'm going to bring up our guest. His name is Errol Doebler. Lovely to have you with me. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here, Elaine. Thanks for having me.
We'll talk a little bit about Ice Cold Leader later, but I'd like you to just give us a little synopsis of who you are and what you do.
Sure. Right now, I'm the founder of my leadership consulting firm, Ice Cold Leader. That name comes from the fact that we use, among other things, but one of the tools we use is cold exposure for a variety of reasons, which we can talk about later. My background, I was a naval officer for many years. I was in the SEAL teams. I was at SEAL Team 4. I was at SEAL Team 1. I got injured on deployment back in the late 90s and was medically discharged. I spent about 4 years in the private sector and then was in New York City, Manhattan on 9/11. And so I witnessed that whole thing happening and decided I needed to get back into the fight. So I joined the FBI after getting medically cleared, and I was there for 13 years, working primarily international terrorism operations. And then left the FBI and started my company, and we help individuals, mostly in corporations, their leadership skills on how to manage and work their way through stress, and really how to apply a problem-solving and thought process to address really any portion of their life, both personal and professional. And now here I am with you.
Let me first say thank you so much for your service, Kapul. Service. We appreciate that. I do come from a military background. My father was Air Force in Britain and here in Canada.
Oh, okay.
I really do appreciate what you've done for your country and ours. It's unfortunately that we live in times where we require so much assistance from our military, and I'm just thankful that we have all of you dedicated people who basically give their lives every day to let us enjoy the freedoms that we have. I'm going to, as usual, let you give us your story in the way that's most important to you, because I think that's how we connect most with the audience. Just going to tell you, start wherever you'd like to, and we'll see where we go.
I think what's most applicable for your audience as it relates to Suicide Zen Forgiveness. When I was medically discharged from the Navy, I had suffered 2 major falls operating in the SEAL teams. both on my head, one going through a door where there wasn't a floor on the other side of it. So I took about a 12-foot header onto the concrete. And the other was out at sea. We were boarding a ship, and that's essentially where we have our small, fast boats, and there's a big tanker, and we're charged with taking it down, and we hook a ladder to the side of it while it's still moving. And the ladder broke as I was about to pull myself over. So it was a 30-foot fall back into the other boat. Both instances, very lucky, quite frankly, to come out with my life. But I was back then, this term traumatic brain injury wasn't even on the radar. So I was discharged for other injuries that I had sustained. And the only thing in my medical record that talks about my head was I had a scar after fell to the floor. So I spent 20 years to reframe that. I began to notice some very distinct changes in myself after I left the Navy. And really, it was a losing control of emotions, and not just bad emotions, even good emotions. But if I were to be angry, my anger would be just super amplified, unnecessarily. If I was sad, it would be super amplified, even happy, right? If you meet somebody for the first time, it's not always appropriate to give them a big hug and a kiss on the cheek, right? Because you're so happy to meet them, right? So even happiness can be inappropriately just expressed. And along with all of those, I started to find myself making a lot of bad decisions. And I caught this. I didn't know what was causing it. So I went through the better portion of my life over 20 years, really just so focused and honed on my emotions, how I was feeling, and then recognizing the intuitive action that I would have on any given emotion, and then deciding whether or not that would be the right action for that situation. And if it wasn't, I would have to make a decision on how to act, and then I would have to plan on how to get through that situation. That's just the way I lived my life. And only about 4 years ago or so, I was at somebody's party, and I met a doctor who specialized in traumatic brain injury. And he was just telling me what he was doing, and it was a non-pharmaceutical treatment that he was using for people. And I listened, and just to be engaged in the stories, I hit my head and I told them the stories of being a SEAL, and they're very exciting and interesting stories. And just said, hey, good luck. People need this. And so he said, what happened to you after? What happened to you? And I said, I just told you what happened. He goes, no, after, like after the injuries. So I hadn't talked about these injuries. The way I was treated after my injuries in several instances really was upsetting by the medical community. So I just said I'm never going to talk about this, because if doctors are dismissing some of the things I'm saying about the challenges I'm having, I'm not going to put myself in that position ever again. So really, for the better part of 20 years, I never talked about what I went through. And so I'm like, this guy's really trying to help people, and it's been a long time, so I'll tell him. So I said, I haven't had a full night's sleep in 20 years. I go into incredible states of depression. I told him about the emotions going back and forth. And so he said, why don't you come in for a scan? So I went in, and it was a thing called a Wabi scan. It measures the energy in your brain. And he looked at it, and it's a very quick scan. And he says, all right, we've got some really interesting things. And he showed me these two sine waves in perfect sync. And he said, that's your heart and your brain wave, and they're in perfect sync. And that's indicative of people who have very strong meditative practices. So I shared some of my meditative practices, cold exposure being one of them, yoga and things like that. And he goes, okay, that makes sense. And then he said, you see this red part in the scan? He said, yeah. And he said, that shows that the brain, that part of the brain is in the perfect alpha state, right? It means you're calm and relaxed, but you're ready to act. And I was like, oh, that's great. Good for me. And he goes, but do you see the blue part? And I said, because there's a lot of blue. He goes, that's the part of your brain that's responsible for your emotional control, essentially. And he said, the blue indicates that it's dormant. It's not working. Can you see that there's no energy going to that area of your brain? And I said, yeah. And he goes, you don't get it, do you? And I said, no, I got it. My heart and my brain waves the red and the blue. He goes, no, you don't get it. He goes, Errol, your clear inability to process emotions properly is completely inconsistent with your heart and brain wave being in perfect sync and that other part of your brain being in the perfect alpha state. And he said, tell me about this process that you, because now this is the process that I teach people from a leadership perspective. He was walking through it. And it's what I explained to you, right? I'm always aware of my emotion. And then the intuitive action. And he said, how long you been doing that? And I said, 20 years. And he goes, how often do you do it? I go, every time I walk into a room. He goes, that sounds exhausting.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. And I said, it is. That's why I have to take a 2-hour nap every day. And he goes, all right, walk me through this cold exposure part. Because he knew about that. And I said, there's a couple parts to it. I said, first, behaviorally, I'm in such a constant state of stress, you don't even recognize it sometimes. So getting into the ice bath reminds me of what stress feels like, right? You get in, you have that. I said, so that's a constant reminder for me that there is other stress out there, and so I can recognize it. He said, then I have taught myself, and I'm this thing called the Wim Hof instructor, right? So I said, I can get into the cold and control my breathing and remain calm. And I said, so I practice that. So when it happens in real life and the stress overwhelms me, I can just get calm and breathe through it. And I said, then secondarily, we know scientifically that the cold resets your nervous system, right? It activates your fight or flight. And especially if you can get calm in it, right? That's it. Especially powerful to go to your rest and digest. It resets your nervous system, clears out the inflammation caused by stress. So now I can think clearly every day about the process. And I said, so that's how I use the cold. And he goes, that explains it. He goes, you saved your own life. He goes, Errol, he goes, your brain scan is so bad. He goes, at best, you should be destitute. That should be the best case scenario. He said, you should absolutely not be a productive business human being, have a successful marriage, happy, which I do. I have a beautiful wife and family that we're very happy. He goes, that shouldn't be happening. He goes, more realistically, you should have been one of those 22 veterans a day that's committed suicide. And it was jarring. It's not exactly what I actually did here.
No.
So then he said, let's take you the rest of the way. And I was like, what's the rest of the way? And he said, this intranasal insulin. And I'll explain it in a minute. But I literally said, I said, Doc, I'm good. I said, I've lived this way for as long as I can remember. Why don't you just save this for the youngsters who need it? I'm fine. And he did his best bedside manner. He just put his hand on my shoulder and he just said, but wouldn't you like to feel better? And I was like, yeah, I guess I would. So I'd just been this way for so long. And my wife had begun to notice changes. They were coming more quickly. And she recognized how hard I worked not to let my behavior negatively affect everything around me. So this intranasal insulin is just that. He took some insulin, right? It was in a syringe, nothing, right? I put my head back. He put the insulin into my nose. It passes what's called the blood-brain barrier. So it goes directly to your brain and it creates energy. Now, it's 10 milliliters in each nostril for 10 minutes. My head was upside down. And he goes, okay, here's a prescription for some insulin. Do this for 2 weeks. And I said, okay. I go to the car and I get in the car. My wife picks me up and she looks at me. She goes, what happened in there? And it was almost a little accusatory. I got the scan and I'm explaining the story I just shared with you. And she goes, no, what else happened in there? I go, that's it. I had the appointment and the scan. She goes, no, something else happened. And I was, what are you doing? And I go, oh, I go, there's insulin. I explained the thing. I put the insulin in my nose. I was upside down. She goes, something's different. Something's different right now. That that heat isn't coming off of you. And I was like, oh, I feel pretty good. The long and short of it, my life changed. She didn't know it was 6 months later or so that I went back in for another scan. And the doctor looked at the scan. He goes, okay, I've never seen anything like this. And he says, all right, the blue part of your brain in the first one scan. I said, yeah. He goes, you see it in the second scan? I go, not really. He goes, yeah, because it's gone. And then he's going through each area of the brain saying, see how you had 0 hertz of energy here, and now you've got 40, which is a massive amount of the whole energy came back into my brain. So that's the science, right? That shows what it did. But what it doesn't really tell is how it changed my life, right? So nobody had to walk on eggshells around me. Here's where I knew everything was okay. So I have a young daughter. I got started late in life with kids. So my daughter at the time was maybe like 8. Yeah. And I'm watching TV, and this is after I get the treatment. And she sneaks up behind me and screams in my ear, I love you, Daddy. One of the things that happens with traumatic brain injury, at least for me, was loud noises really set me off, right? If somebody drops something, what are you doing? If somebody was eating a carrot, for God's sakes. So she comes and yells in my ear, and I turn around, I grab her, and we're wrestling, and I send her off on her way. And about 15 seconds later, my heart went into my throat. It was like, because I realized had she done that only 2 weeks ago, my reaction would have been an elbow to the face, just instinctively. And that's when I knew I was okay. And so this was years ago. I think I did a treatment, I don't know, maybe a year or so ago. And the doctor's like, you can do a maintenance treatment. But I went back a third time for a scan. And not only had the treatment held, the energy was still increasing in my brain. And so this process that I put myself through, right, that I described, right, checking my emotion, it was never able to stick, right? I had to be thinking about it all the time. It never became a habit because my brain was injured. And the doc said to me, he goes, I bet you don't have to think about your process anymore. And I said, I don't. It now finally just comes naturally. So that's a process that I use. I teach people how to get through situations. It's the process I use in my life as a Navy SEAL and in combat, because I had to think, how do I get through this? How did I always remain calm in these stressful situations? And that's just what I did. And it turns out it ended up saving my life too. So that's my story.
That's incredible. And I have to say, what struck me, and I didn't want to stop you because it was so interesting, was all I could think was, my God, you must be exhausted. That constant vigilance, that constant like cortisol running through you is absolutely exhausting. And yeah, and I'm not surprised the doctor said that, but what I think is you said that was the scientific explanation. I think you spiritually, meditatively, all of that were so relieved for someone to actually hear you about what was wrong, that you were able to get past that and correct it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot. right? There's a lot to the whole thing. But what it did show me was that so when I wrote my book, the first part of the book is this story, just to give people some context, right? The second part of the book is the process and working through it and all the things that people should think about. And it's really just meant to give people hope. I went to some very dark places, as you can imagine. And the abuse of alcohol and things like that. And I wasn't an alcoholic, but just like everything else, it was taken to the extreme, right? If I chose to drink, there was a lot of drinking. And then obviously, you know, where you go when that happens in your mind and the things you're considering doing become very scary the next day because I always remembered what I was thinking, even in that state. And it was jarring sometimes. So the book is really, it's a leadership book in theory, but it's not. It's a way to recognize hard times and to offer people hope. There is a way to get through it. There is a way to survive until real help comes. Now, I don't know how much longer I would have survived. At some point, the damage to my brain would have caused Parkinson's or some type of, you're right, something. And then you're on a downhill slide. That said, though, the intranasal insulin, so this is my mission in life now. The researchers found me, people who did this treatment, because it's not an FDA approved treatment. And I wrote about it. And they called me and they're like asking me all these questions about the effects. And is it really true that? And how much insulin did you use? And what type? And I finally was like, look, who are you? What do you want? I'll answer all your questions. And they said, we're the people who developed the patent on this. I'm like, oh, is that so? My doc says he did. And they knew my doc. No, he didn't. But we're not here to get him in trouble. You're just the first person who we found who has gone through this and can talk about it. So they're going into the second phase of this study, and I'm helping them raise the money to do it. They're doing it themselves. I've helped them raise a little bit of money, but they need a couple $1 million more. Yeah. But again, my whole thing is there's help out there. This treatment, this intranasal insulin, will help people. PTSD, which leads to depression, it's all from a degenerative brain function. So this is a truly life-saving thing that's out there.
That's incredible that something so simple, but it's not just that. It's combined with what you did. And the fact is, your book, the whole concept of leadership, I believe it starts with us. If you can't lead you, how can you lead anyone else?
Well, that's why I named the book From the Inside Out, because it all starts from the inside, and only then can it start.
Yeah. And giving people the tools to get past a lot of this. Because the fact is that brain injuries and concussions in athletes and other people, all of those pieces, I believe, can be helped. And this is obviously one of the doors. This is one of the ways people have to look at to consider these larger issues.
Yeah, and you're exactly right, Elaine, because here's the other thing. When I got healed, and I just say that I got healed, my behaviors were still there, right? I had wired those portions of my brain that could be wired to those negative thoughts. And what I really recognized, which was interesting, and I'm still challenged with this, but now I'm still I'm hyper aware of it. I'm like, that's a silly behavior right now. You got to stop because you don't need that behavior anymore. But those were the things that were just happening. There'll be times when something happens and I'll be like, I need to get mad at this, but I'm not really mad. But I'm so used to being mad at things, or I'm so used to reacting a certain way. So there's so much this behavioral, my process. I didn't know this till after the fact, but it's really just what the brain goes through to rewire itself. So I take a perfectly healthy person. We take a perfectly healthy person that wants to change behavior, which is what I help people do, change behavior. That's the process you go through. You got to recognize the emotion first. Nothing happens unless you recognize this is how I'm feeling. And this is how I usually act on how I'm feeling. Those, you can't do anything without that awareness. But once you have that, the brain starts to rewire. Okay. It starts to change. And then when you say, now here's the behavior I'm going to work on, and now you're focused on that, aware of it. Here's a plan on it. I teach people how to make good plans, right? But that's it. That's how the brain rewires itself. So I'm still constantly catching myself for old behaviors that I don't need anymore and that I'm not intuitively doing. I'm just so used to doing them.
It's the comfort zone. We do what we're most comfortable doing.
And what we've wired ourselves to do.
Yes, absolutely.
That's why it becomes comfortable, because it's just now, whether that behavior, as you well know, is good or bad,
Doesn't matter.
it's just what we do. It's what I've always done. And how destructive, however destructive it is, it's what I'm comfortable with. And that's where, aside from the treatment, right? That's why this behavioral thing that I do for people is so powerful. Because it really does help them recognize where they are. And then they can make very targeted adjustments to their behavior. Right? It's easy for me to go, here's what people who are excellent or great leaders do these 4 things. And I might name 4 things, and I won't be wrong. But the question that we have to ask ourselves is, do I need those 4 things? What happens if I already do those 4 things and I'm still struggling? This process allows you to find the thing you need, okay, yourself. So now you're bought in to what you need to do, because your awareness around the emotion and how you act on that, you're like, oh my God, I can't even believe I do that. And now you've found a targeted place to change, which you can. It takes work, but so that's the power.
Wow. With all kinds of things going on in my head. Oh, that's good. We can change this to this.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fascinating. All of this fascinates me. All of the brain stuff has always fascinated me. And another part of the body, totally. But I learned in 1983, 84, through it happening, that it doesn't matter what happens to our body. The body will try to heal. They slit my throat thinking they were helping, and my esophagus tried to put itself back together,
Mm.
because that's what our body does.
Yeah.
And once you know that, once you have something like that happen, then you tend to search for, oh, what else can I do with this?
Yeah.
How else can I change or reset, as you say, what's going on? And it's amazing to understand that there really is no part of us that we can't manage or manage better when we know better, when we understand we don't have to keep doing things that don't work. And we can, in fact, change what we do.
Yeah. And there's this whole notion around, forget about pharmaceuticals. So when I'm about to say what I'm going to say, it doesn't include pharmaceuticals. I don't even discuss pharmaceuticals. I'm not down on people who take them, but I get it. But that's not for me. And it never was going to be for me. So all this behavioral stuff, people say that even the cold, it's just a placebo, right? And the insulin even maybe just a placebo. And my response is, who cares? Good. Maybe it is, because still shows the power of the mind. Okay, so that should even be more encouraging.
Yes.
So great. If I need to put a pen in my ear and I feel better, well, it's just a placebo. Great. Now I have this realization that my mind has that much power, which is to your point.
Yes.
We have to be able to believe those things. We have to see those things. And that's why cold exposure, from my angle, is such a powerful tool, behaviorally, minimal.
Yeah.
People can see that they really can. If I can coach you through changing your behavior in 300 pounds of ice, right? Lots of people, and everybody responds differently.
Yeah.
For example, I'll ask people right before they get in, tell me what you feel like. How are you feeling? They have trouble expressing their emotion. I don't know, whatever it is. And most people say, I'm scared. And I'll say, what do you do when you're scared? Now, I see what they're doing when they're scared, but I want them to articulate, because they'll either be cursing or not paying. There'll be a million different things that you do. And I'll just say, do something different. And they're like, I don't know what to do different. I go, if you curse when you're scared, like you're cursing now, and you don't like that, stop cursing. It just really, it blows their mind. But again, it's the power of the mind showing them, no, all of this is very possible, right? Behavioral change and all these. So yeah, that's
Absolutely. And as I was introducing you, I talked about, I understand the ice stuff because as a child, I spiked horrifically high fevers. And we lived in a very large apartment building. It was not unusual to see people traipsing out of the elevator down the hall on the third floor with ice trays because they would put me in a bathtub full of ice. It was the only way they could get the fevers down. I grew up having ice baths. I'm much less likely to do that now, or was until you and I just talked. May have to get back.
yeah. And here's the thing with, they did that for you out of complete necessity for the fever.
Yeah.
There was no, especially as a child, there's no remedies. Like, you weren't doing it to change behavior or limit the effects of stress, right? You were like, I'm a kid and they're putting me in this ice bath and I have, you're,
I was not teased.
but yeah, your recollection of that obviously has some very negative connotations.
Oh, yeah.
I would encourage you, if you were ever to consider trying again for all the reasons we've discussed, it would help. It would probably help to reframe and all that, because your heart will be fine if you're preparing to go in. It's going to be fine. But again, that's because, but the thing about the ice bath also is people aren't sure why they're doing it. It's become a thing now. So when I bring them through, if I have a seminar where we are going to include ice baths, we talk in depth about the science, right? Here's what's happening. It just makes people feel better, right? Even better about what they're like. I know all this stuff. This is fantastic. So now they get a little more excited to get in for the physiological benefits. And the behavioral stuff is always powerful for them to get into that, remain calm, act differently, choose how we want to act, and then really they apply it. People still contact me years after they'd maybe come to one of my things, but it really still works. So if you're going to do it, it'll be a good reframe for you.
I like that. I like. What are, first of all, let me assure the audience you will be able to get Errol's book and all ways to contact him just below, as with all the show notes and everything else that will be there. But Errol, what are a couple of suggestions you can offer the audience?
Yeah.
Or something that you do every day that just takes you a little forward? You said you dealt with depression, and we have a lot of mental health issues. And so many of us have dealt with suicide loss and ideation. What is it that you do on a day? Some small thing that you can offer the audience that's easy for them to implement in their lives.
Yeah, I get this question a lot, and my answer is always the same because I believe it is the absolute answer. Start with an awareness of how you're feeling. It just everything starts there. Do not judge how you're feeling. It's just how you're feeling. This idea that we have to push anger or jealousy or insecurity aside is wrong. We can't move through it unless we first recognize it and acknowledge it. Okay. There's this thing called the unconscious mind, right? The unconscious mind is where all of those unacknowledged emotions go to wreak havoc on you. We are a closed system, right? We cannot take an emotion out of our ear and put it on the shelf and deal with it when we're ready. It will be dealt with,
Oh, yeah.
whether you're the one who does it or your body just does it the way it chooses to, in the form of pain, back pain, neck pain, or just depression. So when we recognize and then just accept an emotion, then we can start making conscious decisions. Wow, here I am again, feeling sad and angry. Okay, now you get to say, and what? Let me try something else. Try not to be sad. That doesn't mean you cannot be sad, but it means you're starting to think a different way. And eventually, you can try something else, right? Okay, what doesn't make me sad? Whatever it is. But none of that happens unless you're recognizing and aware of the underlying emotion that is causing all of these things. That's something everybody can do. Start by just recognizing and not acknowledging, stop judging.
That's excellent. That is absolutely excellent. The whole concept for some of us of even acknowledging our feelings was so far away from reality so long. And now it seems so. It just seems so that it makes so much sense.
It
And
makes perfect sense, but even when it's this is how I live my life. It's how I lived my life for so long. And sometimes it's a book. It's just it will never be easy. But the price of not doing it or not trying it anyway is far greater than the effort it takes on a daily basis to do it.
yeah, the effort to not do it, I think the price is way too high.
Yeah. Yeah.
And another thing that I'd like your thoughts on, I believe that our emotions, they're meant to flow and go. Again, unless you acknowledge them, that can't happen.
Yeah.
So it all comes down to acknowledging what you're feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And ideally, when I tell people just sit in the emotion, I don't mean for days,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? Just get in it and then do your best to, right? Work yourself, recognize, acknowledge, I don't like this too much. Let me try something different. That's sitting in it, right? It's not being stagnant in it. And they're gonna keep coming and going, and because that's life, right? When I put people through my course, the first week is emotional awareness. They spend a week 4 times a day just texting into our app an emotion. That's it for a week. It can be, I'm angry that I have to do this. I don't care what it is, right? You're acknowledging. And when we get on our call at the end of the week, all I have to say is, Elaine, walk me through your week. I'll have to slap you to shut you up, right? That's it. Yeah, I don't obviously. But you get the right. Shut up. I got it. Because when you go through that drill, you learn things you just weren't even aware. And then what happens is you start to recognize it in others. You start to recognize, wow, that person just said something really mean to me. And instead of responding to the thing, you're asking yourself a deeper question. I wonder what that person is feeling. that would drive them to say that to me. Hey, are you okay that you just said that to me? You're having a different conversation right now, right? And that is powerful. That we talk about positively influencing our environment. That positively influences the environment. When you're asking the right question because you recognize that emotions are driving what other people are doing.
And you're not reacting.
You can just ask a question. Is everything okay? Seems like something might be bothering you to say that to me. Now they're like, don't take it personally. Oh, no, I'm not. I'm more worried that you. Now that's a different conversation, right? That's a conversation. I have young kids. My son is 11, my daughter's 10, my other daughter is 5. And again, this is what people pay me to help them do. And I still forget it with my kids, right? The most important thing, my wife and my kids, I still forget sometimes when something happens. And I, especially with my kids, lash out at the behavior instead of walk me through why you would do. Talk me through what you're feeling right now. Takes a little extra time, but it's the right way to do it.
That's so good. I cannot thank you enough for joining us here. You've left me with a lot to think about. I know the audience will have a lot to think about. And remember, you'll be able to find everything you need to get a hold of Errol and book. And let me know what you think of taking a cold plunge. And see how long it takes me to get there. I think that's going to have to go on the list of what's coming next.
You just start in a cold shower. It doesn't have to be 300 pounds of ice. Just turn it down a little bit and breathe through it.
There we go. More great advice. Thank you. I so appreciate that. My guest, Errol Doebler. I'm Elaine Lindsay. I will be seeing you next time. In the meantime, make the most of your today every day. And I look forward to our next go round. For now.
Thank you for being here for another inspiring episode of Suicide Zen Forgiveness. We appreciate you tuning in. Please subscribe and download on your favorite service and check out SZF's YouTube channel or Facebook community. If you have the chance to leave a 5-star rating or review, it'd be greatly appreciated. Please refer this to a friend you know who may benefit from the hope and inspiration from our guests. Suicide Zen Forgiveness was brought to you by the following sponsors. Truel Social Media, the digital integration specialists. Let them get you rocking page 1 in the search results. Canada's keynote humorist Judy Croon, motivational speaker, comedian, author, and stand-up coach at Second City, Judy has been involved for over a decade in the City Street Outreach Program in Toronto.
The ultimate podcasting path. This is great for you if you're just starting your podcast or if you've been running it for a while. It's filled with tools, templates, and training for starting, growing, and monetizing your podcast. Get access to time-saving systems and strategies for accelerating your process at each step. Find new connections and collaborations in the uplifting podcasting community. I look forward to seeing you there.
Do you have a story to share? Do you know someone you think would be a great guest? Please go to SZF42.com. And for our American listeners, that's SZF42.com. Thank you for listening, and we hope to see you again.
And basically no thought.